The chill wind howled through the halls of the Red Keep as Lord Eddard Stark stood alone in the Tower of the Hand. The letter from Stannis Baratheon lay burnt in the hearth, and his thoughts churned like a storm at sea. Jon Arryn's death, the bastard children, Robert's decline, Cersei's manipulations, each revelation a dagger to the chest. He knew the truth, and he knew what he had to do. But in the shadows behind the power, one man moved like smoke fairies. The spider arrived quietly, uninvited but not unwelcome. Ned did not trust him, but Varys was not here for trust. "We both care for the realm," Varys began softly. "Perhaps we could do more if we acted together." Ned's jaw tensed. "Your methods are deceitful. Poison, lies, whispers. I'm no ally to your games. But you are a man of honor, and that is precisely why you will fail alone," Varys said with an almost tender note. "Honor does not win thrones, but perhaps, if guided carefully, it can save one." Ned turned to him, eyes cold as a north winter. "What do you propose?" "A pact, a shared purpose. The Queen's children are not Robert's. That truth must be managed, not flung into the lion's den. And yet it must come out, in time, but not now. If you declare it before Robert's death, Cersei will strike. Your head, your family, the North gone in a tide of Lannister gold." Varys unfolded a small map on the table. "Instead, let us delay. Convince Robert to send his children away from King's Landing. Plant fear. Have him name you protector. When the time comes, we will control the throne succession." Ned's fingers traced the map absently. The idea clawed at his sense of justice, but also whispered hope. Hope for Arya, for Sansa, for Winterfell. And Stannis? A man too rigid. The realm will fracture under him. Ned hesitated. "You'd prefer Renly?" "No," Varys replied calmly. "I prefer peace. A realm that lives long enough to see dragons return, perhaps. But now, you must play the game." That night, Ned changed course. He did not confront Cersei. Instead, he requested a private audience with Robert. The king, tired and sick with wine, barely listened, but Ned convinced him of one thing. The Lannisters were a threat. Their ambitions would destroy the balance Robert's crown precariously held dot, so Robert agreed. A quiet order was issued to send Tommen and Myrcella to Dragonstone under the pretext of safety. Cersei raged, but she dared not oppose it openly. Ned and Varys had laid their first stone. When Robert was gored by the boar, Ned had the king sign a document naming him protector of the realm. But unlike before, this time the wording was precise. Joffrey was never named. With Varys' help, the raven to Stannis was delayed. Renly was not alerted. Ned called a meeting of the small council and presented the will. Littlefinger, sensing the tides turning, hesitated in his betrayal. Varys, meanwhile, whispered into the ears of key gold cloaks. Money passed hands. Loyalty shifted. When Joffrey was crowned by Cersei, Ned did not walk into the throne room unguarded. He arrived with men loyal to him, and the city watch held their ground as the truth was laid bare. "The boy is not of the king's blood," Ned proclaimed. "The rightful heir is Stannis Baratheon." Chaos erupted, but only briefly. The gold cloaks did not strike. Varys had seen to that. Cersei, cornered, ordered Sir Meryn to seize Ned, but no one moved. Even Littlefinger stood back, unwilling to gamble on the wrong side. The Queen Regent was arrested. Joffrey cried for his mother. Sansa wept, but Arya stood firm, sword in hand. With the city held, Ned sent ravens to Stannis, but he did not name him king yet. Instead, he summoned him to court with the promise of negotiation, not war. "You're playing a dangerous game." Renly warned when he arrived days later, summoned by Varys. "I'm saving the realm," Ned replied. For once, The Game of Thrones had not been won by deceit alone, but by an unlikely alliance of shadows and honor. Stannis Baratheon arrived at King's Landing under heavy guard, his ship cutting through Blackwater Bay like a blade. He bore no banners of peace, only the unwavering chill of righteousness. Ned Stark met him at the gates, flanked by Sir Barristan Selmy and Varys. The two men stared at one another for a long moment. "Ice meeting, Flint. You've done what I expected," Stannis said coldly. "Claimed the regency, played your games. But I am the rightful king. That's not a matter for discussion." Ned inclined his head. "And I do not dispute it. But you must be more than rightful. You must be ready. The realm cannot endure another war. It will not survive it." Stannis glanced past Ned, his jaw tight. "I will not bend." "You won't have to," Varys said softly. "But you must consider what you will do with power once you hold it. The boy king is removed. His mother awaits judgment. The people are frightened. If you march with fire and sword, you may take the throne, but you'll rule a city of ashes." Stannis sneered. "The spider speaks of mercy, and the wolf speaks of peace," Ned added. "But the lion still has claws. Tywin Lannister will not sit idle. If you burn King's Landing to take it, you'll have no throne left. I propose a council of temporary regency until you are crowned properly. Rule with me. Prove to the realm you are not another tyrant." Stannis was no fool. He saw the advantage and legitimacy in coming into power not as a conqueror, but as a savior. After hours of tense council meetings, negotiations brokered by Varys, and backed by the neutrality of Sir Barristan and Grandmaster Pycelle, he agreed. A date was set. Stannis would be crowned after the trial of Cersei Lannister. In the meantime, Ned remained as protector, managing the city and the delicate peace that now clung to the capital like dew on morning grass. But peace was fragile dot in the Westerlands. Tywin Lannister had raised his banners. Jaime, still commanding the armies of the Rock, was furious at the capture of Cersei and the humiliation of Joffrey. When word reached him of what had occurred, his fury burned cold. A raven was sent to Ned Stark, demanding the release of the Queen. Ned's response was clear and measured. Cersei would face a trial. Jaime's reply was steel, but the game had changed. With Stannis now marching no longer as a rebel, but as the future king, many bannermen hesitated. The Vale remained neutral. Thanks to Lord Royce's growing influence over a passive Lysa, the Riverlands, whose loyalty to House Stark ran deep, began to muster troops under Hoster Tully's guidance. And in the north, Robb Stark was named warden in his father's absence. The young wolf was still in Winterfell, training hard and preparing to march if his father fell. Varys worked quietly behind the scenes, forging letters, sending spies into the Lannister ranks, and speaking with merchants to steady the shaken capital. Chaos, he told Ned one night in the Tower of the Hand, is best controlled when shaped by careful hands. And we are shaping it together. Arya trained under Syrio Forel by day, but by night she watched the corridors of the Red Keep, alert and unseen. Sansa, confused and heartbroken, was kept close, but Ned began to speak more openly to her of the real world, the cruelty and deceit, the weight of duty. She was no longer promised to Joffrey. That illusion had ended. The trial of Cersei Lannister began under heavy guard in the throne room. The people of King's Landing, ever hungry for spectacle, crowded the steps outside. The charges were read aloud: adultery, treason, deception of the crown. She stood defiant, her green eyes burning with contempt. "If I fall," she said before, "the court, my house, will not forgive. My father will come for me. My son will take vengeance." Ned answered her with words that echoed through the hall. "Your house put itself above the realm. That ends now. Cersei's fate was sealed, not by execution but exile. Varys had advised mercy a strategic mercy. She would be sent to Casterly Rock under guard, watched but alive. Killing her, he, warned, would ignite a fire across the Westerlands. And so she left, bound in chains, spitting curses. With the city now quiet and the realm watching, Stannis was crowned king of the Andals and the first men, ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. But he was not alone on the Iron Throne. Beside him stood Ned Stark, no longer Hand, but Lord Regent and Warden of the South, a new position forged in necessity. For the first time in many years, the realm had hope. The war had been averted, the truth preserved, and the balance of power reset not by blood, but by unlikely unity. But storms still gathered beyond the horizon. In the far north, beyond the wall, darkness stirred. The others moved silently through snow and shadow, their numbers growing, their reach extending. Few believed the threat was real. Fewer still understood the urgency. But at Castle Black, Lord, Commander Jeor Mormont had sent a raven south, its message grim. The dead walk again. The threat is real. The raven arrived in King's Landing at a moment of uneasy calm. Stannis, newly crowned, spent his days drilling discipline into the court, replacing weak men with iron-willed advisers. Davos Seaworth, loyal and honest, had taken over the royal fleet. The Queen's chambers were empty. Melisandre had not yet arrived, and perhaps that was a mercy. Ned Stark had hoped to delay the Red Woman's influence. Varys, ever watchful, kept a wary eye for signs of her arrival. Ned read the raven's message alone, his brows furrowed. He knew the wall, knew its silence, its dread. "We must send aid," he told the king, but Stannis was unmoved. "The wall is manned. The Night's Watch is sworn. If they need men, they may ask the northern lords. That is not a matter for the Iron Throne." Ned pressed him. "The North answers the watch, yes, but this is not raiders or wildlings. The White Walkers are not a tale. They live. My brother sent word years ago and vanished. Now this." Stannis studied him. "You speak of ghosts. I speak of rebellion. And gold." That night, Ned met with Varys in the darkness of the Godswood. "He won't listen." "Then perhaps," Varys said softly, "we must act without his leave." So ravens flew north again, this time bearing Stark's seal and calling. The banners, House Manderly, House Umber, House Karstark all, were asked to send men to Castle Black. Robb Stark, young but already wise beyond his years, marched from Winterfell with 1,000 swords at his back, while the North moved to defend the realm. Danger brewed in the west. Tywin Lannister had not forgotten his daughter's humiliation nor the arrest of his grandson. Though Cersei had been exiled rather than executed, it was an insult to his legacy. He rallied his forces in Casterly Rock, calling upon bannermen and sellswords. Jaime Lannister, growing restless and reckless, rode at the head of 10,000 men toward the Riverlands. But Catelyn Stark, returned to River Run to see her father in his final days, saw the danger. The Lannisters would march through Tully lands unopposed unless challenged. So she summoned Edmure, and together they sent ravens to Riverroon's allies. This time, however, the Starks moved first not for revenge, but for protection. Robb, acting on his father's command, sent a detachment to Moat Cailin, and another to meet the Riverlords. The Stark banner flew high in the south, as well as the North Dot in King's Landing. Sansa walked the halls like a ghost. She no longer sang songs of gallant knights. She watched, listened. Arya trained Harbor. Faster Syrio had taught her to dance, but the city had taught her to fight. One night, Arya slipped into the council chamber unnoticed and overheard Lord Baelish whispering with a man she did not know. "Ned plays the king's game now," Littlefinger muttered. "But I've planted seeds. When the gold runs dry, so does loyalty." Arya told her father. Ned listened, grim-faced. "I should have sent that snake to the wall when I had the chance." Varys entered the chamber not long after. Baelish has allies in the coin chambers and whispers in the ears of old lords. He hopes to turn the realm again to chaos. "And chaos is his ladder," Ned said bitterly. But Littlefinger wasn't their only concern. One evening, Sir Davos brought news to court. A red priestess had arrived at Dragonstone, claiming visions of darkness, of a great fire in the north, and of a king reborn in flame. Melisandre had come at last. Stannis granted her an audience. She looked at him with eyes full of fire and prophecy. "You are Athor Ahai, Lord of Light reborn. But the threat lies not in gold or iron, it lies in snow." She turned her gaze to Ned. "You've seen it. The pale shadows. The coming storm. Winter is not the enemy. It is death itself." Stannis was moved by her words. The fire in her voice stirred something in him. But Ned felt unease. "She serves a god who burns children," he later told Varys. "If she influences the king, we trade one war for another." The spider agreed, and we must contain her. As winter crept closer and the realm teetered on the edge of war and survival, the unlikely alliance between Varys and Ned Stark was tested again. They had stopped a coup. They had avoided bloodshed. But the North was calling. The dead were stirring, and a queen across the sea watched with growing dragons in her wake. The game was far from over. News of Daenerys, Targaryen's survival, spread slowly across the narrow sea like a whispered rumor. Merchants returning from Karth and Slaver's Bay spoke of a silver-haired girl with dragons at her side. In the halls of King's Landing, such tales were dismissed as myths until Varys brought evidence. A letter, penned in the hand of Illyrio Mopatis, reached the spider through hidden channels. In it, Illyrio confirmed the truth. Daenerys Stormburn, last daughter of the Mad King, had hatched 3 dragons and was raising an army of freed slaves in Essos. She spoke not of vengeance alone, but of justice. And she was coming. When Varys brought this to the council, the room went cold. "She has no ships, no lords, no right," Stannis said dismissively. "The Targaryens are finished." "She has dragons," Varys reminded him. Ned said nothing for a long while, his fingers laced in thought. Finally, he asked, "Does she know what her father did to this realm?" "She was a child," Varys replied. "But children grow, and fire feeds on old wounds." The question loomed heavy in the chamber. Should she be dealt with now, or watched and understood? Stannis was inclined to act, to send assassins. But Ned, who had held her newborn brother in his arms on the ashes of war, could not stomach another child's death, not even a queen's. "We must send an envoy," Ned said. "Someone she cannot sway with beauty or fire. Someone who speaks with honor." "I will go," Sir Barristan said. He had served her father, had watched Robert destroy her house. If she burned with hatred, he would see it. If she burned with justice, he would guide it. Stannis was reluctant, but he agreed. And so Barristan Selmy sailed east on a quiet ship, bearing no banners, only words of peace and warning. Meanwhile, trouble brewed in the West. Jaime Lannister, emboldened by silence from the crown and the slow movements of riverlords, crossed the Red Fork and sacked several Tully outposts. His war bands moved fast, striking hard, then vanishing into the hills. It was not war, it was torment. At River Run, Catelyn met with Robb. "We cannot wait for father's permission. If we do not act now, the Riverlands will bleed dry." Robb, now 17, stood tall beside Grey Wind. "Then we ride. But not to destroy, we ride to trap." Robb moved swiftly, outflanking Jaime's raiders and cutting off their retreat. With the help of Brynden Tully and the scouts of House Mallister, they lured the Kingslayer into an open field at the Whispering Wood. There, under cover of night, Robb struck. This time there was no capture. Jaime Lannister, in full golden armor, dueled Robb Stark under the pale moonlight. Their swords clashed like thunder. Jaime was faster, more seasoned, but Robb fought with purpose. And when the final blow landed, Jaime fell to his knees. Bleeding and beaten, he lived, but his sword hand was crushed by Grey Wind's jaws. News of the Kingslayer's defeat spread fast. In Casterly Rock, Tywin received the Raven with a tight jaw. His son disgraced, his daughter imprisoned, his grandson deposed, his house humiliated. He summoned his bannermen and wrote letters by the dozens, but his power waned out with Jaime defeated and Cersei removed. Many lords in the West began to rethink their allegiance. House Lannister still had gold, but gold could not command fear alone. Some whispered that Tywin had grown too old, others that the gods had turned their favor in the south. Renly Baratheon finally arrived at Storm's End, disappointed that the throne had been claimed. But his pride was tempered by reason. With the Lannisters weakened and no love lost for his brother, he offered alliance. "Give me Highgarden's reach, and I'll raise 10,000 swords in your name." Stannis hesitated, but Ned intervened. "The realm needs stability," he said. "Let Renly keep Storm's End. Let Margaery marry a northern lord. Let the Reach feed the land while the North guards the wall." So a fragile alliance formed. Renly would not press his claim. The Tyrells, soothed by the promise of marriage and autonomy, offered grain and gold. Ser Loras Tyrell, though resentful, honored the pact. Back in the capital, Sansa grew into something sharp and clear-eyed. No longer dreaming of fairy tales, she began studying the ledgers of the castle, learning from Mester Gorman and even whispering questions to Varys. She asked about grain stores, about taxes, about justice. "You plan to rule one day?" Varys asked her. She looked at him calmly. "I plan to survive." Arya, meanwhile, had begun shadowing Lord Commander Barristan's old squires and sparring with Podrick Payne, learning to use her small frame and speed. She no longer asked for Song's only steel. With the Lannisters fading, Stannis growing stronger, and dragons rising in the east, the realm seemed balanced on a narrow blade. Peace had been bought with cunning and caution, but it would not hold forever. For in the north, beyond the wall, the white winds howled louder. And in the east, Daenerys marched with unsullied feet and wings of fire above her. Winter was coming. Across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen stood before the gates of Yunkai, her dragons circling above like shadows made of flame. The Unsullied waited behind her, their spears unshaken, their eyes fixed. Missandei stood at her side, calm and poised. But it was Ser Barristan Selmy who stood just ahead, the sun catching the silver in his hair as he offered the slavers their final choice. "Bend the knee," he said, "or burn." They chose to kneel. When the gates opened and the freedmen poured into the streets, Daenerys watched from atop Drogon, her face still and unreadable. The cheers echoed through the desert like thunder. But as the noise swelled, her thoughts turned west to the Seven Kingdoms, to the Iron Throne, to the name Stark, which Barristan had spoken of more than once with a strange respect. She called him to her tent that night. "You served my father," she said, "but you serve me now. Tell me, what kind of king is this Stannis Baratheon?" "Harsh," Barristan replied. "Honorable, yet cold. Justice without mercy. His claim is lawful, but his heart burns for something beyond the throne." "And Ned Stark?" He paused. "The realm owes him more than it knows. He could have taken the throne, yet he chose peace. He saw honor as a duty, not a crown. And now he shares power with a man he once could have destroyed." Daenerys studied him. "And if I were to return, you would be a spark in a land soaked with oil." She said nothing more, but her mind was already turning. She would not return as her father's daughter. She would return as a queen made not of madness, but of fire and justice. In Westeros, the winds shifted again. Robb Stark, now called the young wolf in full voice, returned to Winterfell at the request of Lord Mormont. The wall had seen worse. Whites, disappearances, direwolves howling in the distance. And now anew dread wildlings, united under a man named Mance Rayder, moving south in numbers too vast to count. Robb stood atop the wall and looked north. We should be fighting here, not in the Riverlands. Samwell Tarly, round and trembling but resolute, brought him word of a blade found beyond the wall dragonglass. He explained what Jon Snow had written before vanishing on a ranging mission. That fire and obsidian could slay the dead. Robb wasted no time. He sent riders to the north, demanding every smith, every mine, begin forging weapons not just of steel, but obsidian. There's a war coming, he told his battermen, and it is not of crowns. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, a different. War Smoleered. Tywin Lannister, battered but unbroken, sent emissaries to the Iron Bank of Bravos. He knew that armies bled gold, and gold bought silence, ships, and assassins. He whispered promises of repayment, of future power. The bank listened. The loans were granted. With coin once again flowing into his hands, Tywin recruited mercenary companies, bribed minor lords, and planted agents within Stannis' own court. One such agent was caught attempting to poison Maester Cresson, now royal advisor to the king. Upon questioning, he confessed to carrying out orders from a lion with silver hair. The message was clear. Ned Stark convened the council. This will not end, he said, until Tywin Lannister is removed. Not slain, removed. Stannis frowned. And how do you propose we do that? He will not kneel. Then we take his tools, the gold, the soldiers, the respect. Varys leaned forward. And how do you do that, Lord Stark? With truth. A letter was sent to every corner of the realm signed by both the king and the Lord Regent. In it was a full account of Robert's death, the falsehood of Joffrey's claim, the crimes of Cersei, and the war crimes of Tywin Lannister in the Riverlands. Accompanying it were testimonies, confessions, and the names of those who had died in silence. The response was slow at first, but gradually houses began to reconsider their loyalties. Some declared for the crown again. Some withdrew from Tywin's cause. Others sent word to River Run, asking for guidance. The lions still roared, but fewer now listened. In the east, Daenerys sailed from Meereen with a fleet of 100 ships, carrying Unsaled, Dothraki, and dragons above. Her banners flew high black and red, but her message, sent ahead of her by Raven, was simple. I come not to conquer, I come to speak. The blood of the dragon does not burn without reason. When her letter reached King's Landing, it was read in silence. Stannis scowled. Ned said nothing. Varys looked intrigued. But it was Sansa who finally spoke. Let her come. If we are just men, we have nothing to fear from a just queen. The court grew quiet. Daenerys was coming. From the north marched the dead. And in the south, honor and shadow still held the throne together. But for how long? No man could say. The sea was quiet as Daenerys Targaryen's fleet reached Blackwater Bay, the sunrise catching the sails of her ships and casting long shadows across the water. Drogon soared ahead, a great black beast against the morning sky. The people of King's Landing gathered on rooftops and walls to watch the approach of the Dragon Queen, not with fear, but with awe. For many, the stories had become real. But inside the Red Keep, the small council sat in tension. She must be met before she sets foot in the city, Stannis said. If she seeks peace, we speak on neutral ground. If she lies, we strike before. Her dragons take to the sky. Ned nodded. Agreed. I will meet her myself, with only Sir Davos and 100 men. Stannis gave a curt nod. If she betrays you, I burn her ships. Varys interjected smoothly. Let us hope it does not come to that. Fire must not answer fire, not if we want a future for the realm. So, on the beach outside the city, a great tent was raised. It was there that two legends met for the first time. Daenerys entered with Missandei, Grey Worm, and Sir Jorah Mormont at her side. She wore no crown, only a simple black cloak clasped with a silver dragon. Her gaze was steady as it met Ned Stark's. You are the man who spared my life in a council that called for my death, she said. I am the man who believes in children growing up to be more than their parents, Ned replied. You bring dragons and soldiers. I ask only for your intentions. I do not come to burn cities, Daenerys said, but I will not bend the knee to men who ruled under my father's usurper. I was born for that throne. And yet you bring justice, not madness, Ned observed. The realm does not need another war. The North fights a greater enemy, and the capital holds its breath for peace. She studied him for a long moment. Then let peace begin here. I will not challenge the crown for now. Let me land, let me speak. Let the people see I am not fire and blood alone. And in return? Ned asked. I ask that you give me the chance to prove I can rule without fear. If the realm still wants Stannis after I speak to its lords, I will leave. But if the realm calls for me, I will answer. It was a dangerous balance, allowing her presence without inviting civil war. But Ned saw something in her eyes that reminded him of Jon Snow. Someone young, tempered by pain, with fire inside, but not yet consumed by it. He agreed. Entered King's Landing not as a conqueror, but as a guest. Her dragons perched atop the ruins of the old sept, watched closely by archers and mages brought from Old Town. Stannis gave her no official welcome, but permitted her to speak before the lords of the realm. In the great hall, she stood where Aerys had once ruled, facing nobles and knights from every corner of Westeros. She spoke of freedom, of justice, of a throne earned, not inherited. She promised to abolish slavery forever, to reform the courts, and to rebuild what war had broken. And then, unexpectedly, she turned to Sansa Stark. You were a prisoner of the Lannisters. You know what it is to be used. What do you see when you look at me? Sansa stood. Her voice was quiet, but firm. I see someone who has lost much, like me. But I also see someone who still has something to lose. That matters. The hall murmured outside. The city, ravens flew. One carried news from the wall. Jon Snow had returned. He had crossed the lands of the wildlings, fought whites, and now bore a warning. They come in numbers that cannot be counted, his message read. We need every sword, every fire, or none of this will matter. The North rallied first. Robb Stark sent men south to help defend the capital. The Vale, swayed by Lord Royce and Sansa's letter, pledged knights and rangers. Even Dorne, long, quiet, sent emissaries, stirred by Daenerys' vision of a new realm. But war was not done with them yet. In the west, Tywin Lannister made his final move. He hired the Golden Company, 10,000 hardened swords, and sailed for Cracklaw Point. He aimed to strike the capital from the east, just as the dragons took wing. It would be one last gambit, one last roar from the Lion of the Rock. When the ships were spotted, King's Landing readied for war, Stannis called the banners. Daenerys prepared her dragons. Ned took command of the city's defenses. As the Golden Company landed, the ground shook with the march of soldiers. Then came fire. Drogon descended like a black comet. Rhaegal followed, breathing emerald flame. The Golden Company scattered, burned, broken before they could form ranks. Tywin stood on the cliffs, watching it unfold. As the smoke rose, he turned to his squire. We've lost. He was captured before the sun set. Taken to King's Landing in chains, he faced Stannis, Daenerys, and Ned together. There was no trial. Only a sentence. I built kingdoms, Tywin sighed. And now you let dragons rule again. No, Ned replied. We let hope rule. And so ended the last breath of Lannister rebellion. Peace, long delayed, began to take root. But in the north, the dead marched dot, and in the capital, decisions still loomed. Who would rule, who would serve, and who would face the long night? The snow fell heavier in the north. At Castle Black, the sky was the color of iron, and the air tasted of dread. Jon Snow stood atop the wall, his black cloak snapping in the wind as he watched the pale horizon. He had seen the White Walkers. With his own eyes watched them raise the dead, felt their cold presence seep into bone. The wall would not hold them forever. Below, thousands of men gathered. Robb Stark had arrived days ago with the strength of the North. Knights from the Vale rode alongside them, and even wildlings, led by Tormund Jonsbane, stood ready. Jon had convinced Mance Rayder to bring what remained of the free folk south to fight, not as enemies, but as allies. Ghost prowled at his side. In King's Landing, the final council had convened. It was a gathering unlike any the realm had ever seen. Stannis Baratheon, the crowned king, stern and silent. Ned Stark, regent and now savior in the eyes of many. Daenerys Targaryen, dragon queen with the loyalty of half the realm. Winter is no longer coming. Jon's letter read, placed before them by Mester Gorman. Winter is here, and with it death. Daenerys stood. Then we must go north. All of us. Stannis clenched his jaw. Abandon the capital? Defend the realm, Ned replied. A throne means nothing if no one survives to sit on it. In the days that followed, the greatest host Westeros had seen in a generation began to march. From the Stormlands and the Reach came fresh soldiers. Dorne sent spearmen and scouts, and even ships from Old Town carried food and obsidian. Daenerys flew north ahead of them on Drogon, with Rhaegal and Viserion beside her. Before leaving, Ned placed the city in the care of Sansa, now grown into her own. Lead with reason, not fear, he told her. The people remember those who keep them safe. I will, she said, and I'll remember what all this cost. Arya, refusing to be left behind, rode with Ned. She no longer asked permission. She carried needle and wore armor light enough to vanish in. The north was her blood. She would not watch it die. As the armies neared the wall, the wind screamed. Jon met them at the gates. His hair was longer, his face harder, his eyes colder. But when he saw Daenerys dismount, he paused. Their eyes met fire and snow. He bowed his head. My queen, he said softly. She shook hers. Not yet. For now, we fight as equals. Together, they planned the defense. Gendry, now leading the forges, had produced hundreds of obsidian blades. Samwell had studied the records and trained dozens in the art of burning the dead. Dragons circled above by day and night. The long night had come. On the first day, the first day, sky turned black with snow and smoke. The White Walkers arrived in silence, tens of thousands of corpses, eyes glowing blue, weapons cold as death. The Night King rode a dead horse at their center, pale and still as ice. Robb Stark led the cavalry on the western flank. Jon Snow and Daenerys fought from the air. Viserion was struck early, his wing torn by an ice spear, and he fell behind this wall. On the ground, Arya fought like a ghost, slipping through the battlefield, cutting down whites, never stopping. Ser Davos manned the supply lines, keeping torches lit and obsidian blades ready. Ned fought beside Jon, his gray hair damp with snow, his sword never still. Once he looked over the battlefield and saw Robb, alive and fighting, and Arya, fierce as a wolf. A rare peace touched him, but the battle was not yet won. As the Night King advanced, dragons clashed in the sky. Rhaegal and Drogon circled him, but ice and magic blazed from his presence. Jon dismounted and pursued him on foot. Daenerys landed, exhausted, her vision blurred. She tried to burn the Night King, but again, as before, the fire swirled around him and faded. He raised his hand. The dead began to rise again. Jon charged. Then, from the shadows behind the Night King, Arya Stark leapt. Needles shattered against his armor. He turned, grasped her throat, and was stabbed through the eye with a dragonglass dagger she had hidden in her glove. The Night King's face cracked. He exploded into shards of ice and wind. The whites collapsed, lifeless. The long night ended. Field was silent. The sun rose. Daenerys fell to her knees beside Drogon, whose side bled but still rose to meet the dawn. Jon found Arya and held her tightly. Robb looked across the battlefield at his family and knew the North had survived. That night, as fires burned to honor the fallen, Ned Stark walked among the dead and thought of all that had been lost and all that had been saved. The war for the throne had turned into a war for life. And now the realm would need to decide who would lead not out of blood, but out of earned trust. The realm was quiet. For the first time in years, no battles raged, no banners clashed, and no kings contended for power. The White Walkers were gone, and with them the long shadow of death. But victory had left behind its cost fields scorched by dragonfire, homes emptied by war, and eyes that would never look the same again. At Winterfell, the great lords gathered. Stannis Baratheon stood cold and upright, cloaked in black and crowned in iron. His banners flew beside the stag and flame of House Baratheon. Beside him stood Melisandre, silent now, her eyes never leaving the snow. Though her god had guided them through the night, the fire in her gaze was dimmer. Daenerys Targaryen, dressed in fur-lined leather and steel, stood before the hearth in the Great Hall. She did not speak of fire or thrones. She had seen too many bones burned to ash. Drogon rested far to the east, wounded but alive, a god of shadow on the horizon. Ned Stark sat at the high table, older now, beard flecked with white, eyes deepened by grief. He had given much for this moment, friends, peace, certainty. But what remained was his family, and a realm on the edge of rebirth. Jon Snow stood behind them all, cloaked in black once again. He refused all titles, commander, prince, king. He wanted none of it. The wall is not just stone, he had said. It's the memory of what we faced. I will rebuild it. That is my place. Arya leaned against a stone pillar, arms crossed, a sword at her side. She watched everyone and said little. She had not slept since the Night King fell. There's more beyond the sea, she told Sansa. Maybe I'll find it. Maybe I won't come back. Sansa did not ask her to stay. Robb Stark, Warden of the North in all but name, kept order. His council included wildlings and men of the Watch, Tullys and Karstarks, Manderleys and Umbers. He had seen the Night King fall with his own eyes and vowed no king or queen would ever again blind the realm to true danger. And then came the matter of the crown. Stannis addressed the hall. I am king by law and blood. I have fought for the realm, bled for it. I ask not for gratitude, but for allegiance. The lords murmured, but Daenerys stepped forward. And yet the people do not love you. They fear you. I too have blood and fire, but I do not seek a throne built on ash. She turned to the lords. Let the realm choose. Let the great houses decide who should rule not because of name, but because of merit. A pause filled the room. Then Ned stood. Titles have brought us war. Dynasties have brought us madness. Let us forge something new. He laid a sword on the table, his father's sword, ice reforged. Let the Council of Lords choose the next ruler, not inherit it. And so they debated. The North chose Robb Stark, but he declined. I will never wear a crown while winter still haunts these woods. The Reach supported Daenerys, swayed by her mercy and vision. Dorne, independent as always, echoed the call for a new order, a rotating council of chosen rulers. The Vale stood with the Starks. The Riverlands sought peace above all. In the end, they agreed. There would be no more hereditary kings. No Iron Throne. No Targaryen restoration. No Baratheon claim. Instead, a great council would be formed 12 seats from across the realm, chosen by houses and by people alike. Together, they would elect a leader, a steward of the realm, one for each generation. Power shared, not inherited. Daenerys accepted the outcome and chose to return to the east, to rebuild lands broken by slavery and war. Drogon flew beside her. As she left Westeros, not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. Stannis returned to Storm's End, his claims surrendered, but his service honored. He would rebuild his house with dignity, not ambition. Jon Snow vanished into the snows of the north. Joined by Ghost, Tormund, and the Free Folk, he never returned to the south. Some said he found peace beyond the wall. Others claimed he became a myth. Sansa remained in Winterfell, Lady of the North, wise, sharp, and resolute. Arya sailed west, chasing maps never drawn. And Ned Stark, he stood once more in the Godswood. Of Winterfell, the snow drifting down through the branches of the old weirwood. He knelt, hand upon the cold earth. "We won," he whispered. The leaves rustled. The war was over. The realm was healing. And for the first time in a long, long time, there was peace.